Kavian Thresh stood in the observation tower of his research estate, surrounded by holographic displays showing ancient artifacts and star charts. His fingers traced the air, manipulating a three-dimensional model of a crystalline structure he'd discovered beneath the settlement 3 weeks earlier. The object was exquisite, intricately carved, with symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on the angle of view. He'd spent the last decade studying these ruins, trying to understand the civilization that had occupied Nova Haven before humanity arrived. It was solitary work, a kind that suited him perfectly. He had never been comfortable with people, with their expectations and small talk. Here, surrounded by the mysteries of the past, he felt at home that a chime at the door interrupted his concentration. Kavian sighed, dismissing the hologram with a flick of his wrist. Yes, his housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, appeared in the doorway. You have visitors, sir. They said it's urgent. Kavian frowned. He rarely received visitors at his estate, preferring to conduct research in solitude. Who is it? A gentleman named Darius Vex and a woman with silver hair. They seemed quite distressed. The name Darius Vex sent a jolt through Kavian's chest. He hadn't seen Darius in nearly 5 years, not since their university days when they'd bonded over their shared love of exploring unmapped territories and learning about alien cultures. They'd grown apart as Darius pursued commerce and Kavian pursued knowledge, but they'd remained friends, corresponding occasionally through messages. Send them in, Kavian said, moving away from his desk to greet them properly. Darius entered first, and Kavian was immediately struck by how much his friend had aged. The vibrant merchant he remembered had been replaced by someone drawn and worried, his clothing less immaculate at his usual standards. Behind him came a young woman with shimmering silver hair that fell to her waist, dressed in traditional Vidalian wedding attire, a flowing cream-colored gown with intricate silver embroidery. Her lavender eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and her green skin bore a delicate shimmer that Kavian recognized as a sign of emotional distress among Vidalians. Darius, Kavian said, extending his hand in greeting. It's been far too long. Darius clasped his hand firmly. Kavian, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I know this is irregular, but I find myself in a situation that requires the help of someone I trust implicitly. The formality in Darius's tone worried Kavian. This wasn't the jovial merchant he knew. Of course. Please sit. He gestured to the comfortable seating area near the window. With its view of Nova Haven's twin moons rising over the distant mountains. The young woman sat gracefully, her posture perfect despite her obvious emotional turmoil. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded precisely in her lap. Kavian settled into a chair across from them, his scholar's mind already working to piece together the situation. This is my daughter, Meridian, Darius began, his voice thick with emotion. Meridian, this is Kavian Thresh, an old friend of mine from our university days. Meridian inclined her head slightly, in acknowledgement, but said nothing. Kavian noticed how her shoulders trembled slightly, and how her fingers twisted together in her lap. Meridian is of age, Darius continued, his words coming quickly, as if he needed to get them all out at once. And I found myself in a situation that requires ... Well, it requires the kind of partnership that our people have traditionally used to resolve matters of honor and debt. Kavian felt his stomach drop as understanding began to dawn on him. Darius, what are you saying? I'm in significant financial difficulty, Darius admitted, pain evident in his features. A shipping venture went catastrophically wrong. The Craxian pirates destroyed my merchant fleet, and I owe debts that I cannot repay. I've spent the last 3 months trying to find solutions, but every door has closed. My people respect a tradition that perhaps your modern human sensibilities have abandoned, the marriage contract. When a merchant of honor cannot repay his debts, he may offer his unmarried offspring in a binding partnership with another merchant or professional of standing. Kavian's immediate instinct was to refuse. This belonged to ancient history, not to a modern frontier settlement where species intermingled and cooperated. And yet, he understood enough about Vidalian culture to know that Darius wouldn't have come to him if there was any other option. The shame of proposing such an arrangement would have destroyed him otherwise. "You're asking me to marry your daughter," Kavian said slowly, wanting to be absolutely clear on what was being proposed. "I'm asking if you would consider a binding partnership with Meridian," Darius said carefully. "She is educated and skilled in managing a household. She speaks 3 human languages fluently. She is kind, intelligent, and by your standards, beautiful. In return, her marriage contract would clear my debts, and Meridian would have the security of a home and a partner who could provide for her." At this, Meridian finally looked up, her lavender eyes meeting Kavian's for the first time. He saw fear there, yes, but also a kind of resigned acceptance. She had clearly already accepted her fate before coming here. The tears that had obviously been shed were not fresh. These were old tears, cried in private where no one else could see them. "Meridian," Kavian said gently, "do you understand what your father is proposing?" She nodded, her voice soft and musical when she finally spoke. "I do, and I understand that this is necessary to preserve my family's honor. My father has always provided for me with love and care. This is a debt he must repay." She paused, her lavender eyes searching his face. "If you choose to accept this arrangement, I will be a good wife to you, Professor Thresh. I give you my word." Something in her composure, in the way she had accepted an arranged marriage to a stranger with such grace and dignity, moved Kavian deeply, and he saw in her not an obligation, but perhaps a solution to his own loneliness. He'd built a life of solitude and scholarship, but there were nights when the quiet felt too heavy, too empty. A companion, a partner, it wasn't something he'd actively sought, but perhaps it was something he needed. "I need some time to consider this," Kavian said finally. "This is not a decision to make hastily. Darius, can you give me 3 days?" "Of course," Darius replied, relief flooding his features. "You honor us with your consideration." 3 days passed like seconds. Kavian found himself unable to concentrate on his research, his mind circling endlessly around the proposal. He consulted with his best friend, Silas Wright, who initially laughed at the absurdity of the situation before realizing Kavian was serious. Silas offered advice, both practical and emotional, ultimately telling Kavian that love was a curious thing. Sometimes it grew from seeds deliberately planted, and sometimes those grew into the most beautiful gardens. On the 3rd day, Kavian sent word to Darius that he would accept the marriage contract. The ceremony took place in the settlement's cultural center, a neutral space designed to honor the traditions of multiple species. Kavian stood at the altar in formal human dress, a dark suit with silver accents that honored Vidalian aesthetics. He'd spent time with the settlement's cultural advisor, learning the proper Vidalian wedding rituals, wanting to show respect for Meridian's heritage. When Meridian entered, Kavian's breath caught in his throat. She wore the same cream-colored gown from before, but now it was adorned with fresh white flowers, and someone had arranged her silver hair in an intricate style with more flowers woven throughout. The fear that had been so evident in her eyes during their first meeting had been replaced with a kind of steely determination. She walked with grace, her lavender eyes fixed forward, refusing to show any emotion to the gathered witnesses. As she reached him at the altar, Kavian bowed slightly in the Vidalian way, as a sign of respect and partnership rather than dominance. He saw her eyes widen slightly at this gesture, and a flicker of something surprise, gratitude, crossed her features. The ceremony proceeded through both human and Vidalian traditions, a blending of cultures that some of the older residents viewed with suspicion, but most embraced. When the moment came for them to exchange vows, Kavian spoke first, his scholar's mind having carefully chosen his words. Meridian Vex, I take this bond not as a transaction, but as a beginning. I promise to honor your heritage, to respect your autonomy, and to treat you with the kindness and consideration that a true partner deserves. I cannot promise that this will be easy, but I can promise that it will be genuine. Meridian's lavender eyes glistened as she spoke her own vows, her voice steady and clear. Kavian Thresh, I enter this bond with hope rather than despair. I promise to be a true partner to you, to learn your ways while maintaining my own identity, and to build something meaningful from this arrangement. I come to you with an open heart, and I ask that you meet it with yours. When they sealed the bond with a brief kiss, tentative and polite, rather than passionate, Kavian felt something shift in his chest. Meridian's lips were soft, cool beneath his, and the slight intake of her breath suggested she felt something too, though whether it was attraction or merely surprise, he couldn't yet say. That night, in the house that was now theirs, Kavian found Meridian in the kitchen. She wore one of his old shirts, having changed out of her wedding gown, and she was studying his stove with the intense focus of an archaeologist examining a particularly complex artifact. It's not quite as intuitive as our cooking equipment, she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence. But I think I understand the basic principles. Would you like dinner? Kavian smiled, moved by her determination to fit into his life. I would like that very much. As they ate together in his dining room, surrounded by artifacts and books and the comfortable silence of two people beginning to understand each other, Kavian found himself wondering if perhaps Darius, whether intentionally or not, had done him the greatest favor of his life. Outside, the binary moons painted the sky in shades of silver and purple, and somewhere in the distance, an alien bird sang a song that sounded almost like music made manifest. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Kavian's study, casting long shadows across shelves lined with ancient texts and glowing data tablets. Meridian stood on a ladder, carefully examining the titles on one of the upper shelves, her silver hair catching the sunlight and turning it into something luminous. She'd been in the study for nearly 2 hours already, and Kavian found himself unable to concentrate on the crystalline artifact he was supposed to be cataloging. Instead, he watched her move with deliberate grace, pulling down books and studying their covers with intense curiosity. 3 weeks had passed since their wedding. 3 weeks of cohabitation that had transformed from awkward and formal into something unexpectedly comfortable. Meridian had fallen into his household with remarkable efficiency, but what fascinated Kavian most was her genuine hunger for knowledge. She approached his collection of books and research materials the way he imagined she'd approach a new planet to explore, with wonder and methodical determination. This one is extraordinary, Meridian called out, holding up a leather-bound volume with faded silver markings. It appears to be a translation of ancient Vidalian poetry from the pre-expansion era, but the binding is human craftsmanship. Very unusual. It is, Kavian agreed, moving toward the ladder. I acquired it from a dealer 5 years ago. He told me it was one of only 3 remaining copies after the cultural purge on Vero 7. I've been meaning to study it more carefully. Meridian climbed down carefully, the book held reverently in her hands. May I read it? Of course, Kavian said. Everything in this house is yours to explore. Well, except the locked cabinet in the north corner that contains some artifacts that are fragile enough to require specific environmental controls. You have a great many secrets, Meridian observed, though there was no accusation in her tone. Instead, she seemed intrigued, settling into one of the comfortable reading chairs with the poetry book .kavia, and returned to his work, but found himself stealing glances at her over the next hour. She read with intense focus, her lavender eyes tracking across the pages with the speed of someone who read multiple languages fluently. Occasionally, she would pause, tilting her head slightly as if considering a particularly complex thought. Once, he saw tears forming in her eyes as she read, though she wiped them away quickly, maintaining her characteristic composure. Around midday, Silas Wright arrived for their regular research meeting. He was a human colleague from the settlement's historical society, and one of the few people Kavian considered a friend. Silas was the opposite of Kavian in almost every way: outgoing, animated, and far too comfortable with social situations. He stopped short in the study doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of Meridian curled up in the reading chair. "You must be the mysterious bride everyone's talking about," Silas said with a warm smile. "I'm Silas Wright. I've known this recluse for about 15 years now, and I have to say, you've already done him a world of good. He usually looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. Today, he just looks like he hasn't slept in days." Meridian stood, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting that she'd been learning. "Meridian Vex. It's a pleasure to meet a friend of my husband's." Kavian watched as Silas took her hand, his keen eyes assessing her with the warmth they usually reserved for ancient artifacts. "Well, this is interesting," Silas said, turning to Kavian. "You actually married someone instead of just collecting more books about relationships. Character development, my friend." "Silas," Kavian said, feeling a slight heat creep up his neck. "We were about to break for lunch. Perhaps you'd like to join us?" What followed was an afternoon that completely disrupted Kavian's carefully ordered life. Silas, in his chaotic and generous way, decided that Meridian needed a proper tour of the settlement, and before Kavian could protest, the three of them were walking through the markets of Nelva Haven. Meridian had only left the house for necessary appointments since the wedding, and her eyes widened with genuine delight at everything around her: the vendors selling exotic foods, the street musicians playing instruments that blended human and Vidalian technology, the children from various species playing together in a public square. Silas proved to be an excellent guide, explaining human customs and answering Meridian's questions with patient good humor. He showed her the human section of the market, where familiar earth produce grew under specialized lights, and then the Vidalian section, where merchants sold traditional foods and textiles that were impossible to replicate in human facilities. When they reached a street vendor selling traditional Vidalian sweets, Meridian's face transformed with homesickness, and she bought a small portion, sharing it with both Kavian and Silas. "These are made from the nectar of the singing flowers that bloom in the southern continents of Veros," she explained, watching their reactions carefully. "They're considered a luxury because the flowers only bloom during the dark season." Kavian bit into one of the small crystalline candies and was immediately struck by the complexity of the flavor suite, but with undertones of something floral and almost spicy. It was unlike anything he'd ever tasted. Meridian was watching him, and when she saw his expression, a small smile played at her lips. "You like it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Very much," Kavian replied. "Will you teach me how to make these?" "They require the actual flower nectar," Meridian said, "which we cannot obtain here. But there are other Vidalian dishes I can prepare, if you would like me to." "I would," Kavian said, meaning it more than just in the context of food. As the afternoon wore on, Silas excused himself, claiming he had research to attend to, though not before shooting Kavian a meaningful look that made it clear he deliberately orchestrated the entire expedition. Kavian and Meridian found themselves alone in a small botanical garden that sat at the edge of the settlement, a place where both human and alien plants thrived side by side in careful harmony. They walked in silence for a while, Meridian pausing occasionally to examine a flower or touch the strange metallic leaves of an alien plant. Finally, she turned to him, her lavender eyes serious. "Your friend is kind," Meridian said, "and perceptive. He watches you the way you watch ancient artifacts, with affection for what they are. and curiosity about what they might become. Silas is my oldest friend, Kavian admitted. He has a way of disrupting my carefully planned life, but I think I would be quite lost without him. He's trying to help us, Meridian continued. I think he senses that we are still learning each other, still uncertain. Kavian stepped closer to her, drawn by her honesty. Are you uncertain? He asked. Meridian was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a cluster of purple flowers that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. I was terrified when I came to you, she said softly. I had heard stories about humans, about how aggressive your species is, how you take what you want without considering the consequences. I thought I was being sent to some kind of servitude, or worse. But you have been patient. You've given me space to learn your customs, to adjust to this new life. You treated me with respect on our wedding night, when you could have simply taken what the contract allowed you. Kavian felt something tighten in his chest at the vulnerability in her voice. Meridian, this arrangement began because of financial circumstances, but I have no intention of treating it as a transaction. You are not a possession to be used. You're a person intelligent, capable, and deserving of genuine partnership. She turned to face him fully, and he saw the uncertainty in her lavender eyes. Then what are we, Kavian? If not a transaction, what is this between us? It was the question he'd been asking himself since she'd arrived at his house. What had started as a logical solution to two separate problems had begun to transform into something he couldn't quite name. He'd never been comfortable with emotional expression, had spent his entire adult life preferring a company of ancient artifacts to living people. But Meridian was making him want to try. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I'd like to find out, if you would. Over the following weeks, they began to truly explore each other's worlds. Meridian spent hours in Kavian's study, asking him to explain his research, listening with genuine interest as he described the civilization that had once inhabited Nova Haven. She learned to recognize the symbols carved into the ancient artifacts, and she taught him the historical context that his human resources lacked. It turned out that the civilization he'd been studying had connections to ancient Vidalian culture, something neither of them had known when they started. In return, Meridian shared her world with him. She taught him Vidalian philosophy, which was vastly different from human approaches to understanding the universe. Where humans tended toward empirical observation and logical deduction, Vidalians approached knowledge through intuition and pattern recognition, seeing the universe as a network of connected energies rather than separate, mechanical systems. My people believe that all things in existence are connected, Meridian explained one evening as they sat on the balcony of his house, watching the binary moons rise over the distant mountains. We call it the resonance. Everything vibrates at a particular frequency, and when frequencies are compatible, connections form friendships, partnerships, loves. They're not separate phenomena. They're all expressions of the same fundamental cosmic principle. That's beautiful, Kavian said thoughtfully. But how do you measure compatibility if it's not through logical analysis? You feel it, Meridian said simply. It's something beyond words, beyond explanation. Either two frequencies harmonize, or they don't. Some human scientists have dismissed Vidalian philosophy as unscientific, but they're wrong. It's just a different kind of science, one based on pattern recognition rather than isolation and testing. Kavian considered this. In his years of studying ancient civilizations, he'd come across numerous references to what sounded like the resonance in human culture's to love at first sight. Inexplicable connections between people, synchronicities that seemed too perfect to be coincidence. Perhaps humanity had simply forgotten this language that the Vidalians had preserved. Do you believe in the resonance? He asked her. Between us, I mean? Meridian was quiet for a long moment. She reached over and placed her hand on his, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. "I think we're beginning to develop one," she said softly. "When I first came to you, I felt only fear and resignation. But now when I'm near you, I feel a kind of harmony. Like our frequencies are learning to complement each other." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Kavian felt Meridian's hand find his beneath the covers. It was just skin against skin, nothing more, but it felt like the most intimate thing they'd shared since their wedding night. And when she moved closer, resting her head on his chest, Kavian realized that Silas had been right. The seeds of something genuine had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. The weeks turned into months. Meridian began to integrate into the settlement, making friends with the human residents who were initially skeptical of the arranged marriage, but soon fell under the charm of her curiosity and kindness. She volunteered at the settlement library, where her knowledge of multiple languages made her invaluable. She learned to cook human food alongside Vidalian dishes, and their home became known for the remarkable fusion meals she prepared. But what transformed Kavian the most was how Meridian approached his research. She didn't just listen passively. She asked questions that made him reconsider his conclusions, offered perspectives that he never would have considered on his own. Together, they made breakthrough discoveries about the ancient civilization, uncovering evidence that suggested their society had valued cooperation between different species and had been a hub of cultural exchange. One evening, as they sat in his study going over their latest findings, Meridian reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear, a gesture that had become habitual. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly, not looking at him, focused instead on the holographic display before them. Kavi in single quotes, breath caught in his throat. He'd known it was coming, had felt it building in himself for weeks now, but hearing her say it aloud made it real in a way that thoughts and feelings alone never could. "I think I fell in love with you 3 months ago," he said. "Probably around the time you reorganized my entire artifact collection by cultural origin and historical period." Meridian laughed, that musical sound that had become his favorite sound in the entire universe. "That was very logical and organized." "Very you." "Exactly," Kavian said, turning to face her. "You understood me before I understood myself. And you made me want to be better at being human, to be present, to connect, to care about someone other than ancient history." He kissed her then, a kiss that was nothing like the tentative, polite kiss they'd shared at their wedding. This kiss held months of discovery, of genuine affection, of two people from different worlds who had found harmony in each other. When they broke apart, Meridian's lavender eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Among my people, when two beings declare their love openly, it's considered a sacred bond," she whispered. "One that transcends the original agreement. It becomes a true partnership, blessed by the resonance itself." "Then let this be our true beginning," Kavian said, holding her close. "Not an arrangement born of debt, but a choice made by two people who have learned to love each other." As the night deepened around them, with only the glow of the holographic display and the distant light of the twin moons illuminating the study, Kavian and Meridian held each other, two beings from different worlds who had discovered that love was perhaps the most universal language of all. In the silence of his study, surrounded by the artifacts of ancient civilizations and the data of modern discovery, they had created something entirely new, a bond that transcended species, culture, and the circumstances of their beginning. And in that moment, Kavian understood what Silas had tried to tell him all those weeks ago. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life grew from seeds you never expected to plant. The alarm screamed through the settlement at 0300 hours, a sound that had never been used in the 3 years since Nova Haven had been established as a neutral trading post. Meridian woke with a start, Her alien physiology responding faster than human reflexes, she was already sitting upright before Kavian's eyes had fully opened. Through the windows of their bedroom, they could see emergency lights flashing across the settlement, casting everything in alternating shades of red and white. "What's happening?" Meridian asked. Her musical voice tight with fear. Covin was already moving, pulling on clothes and tapping his communication device. "This is Thresh," he said into the device. "What's the emergency?" The response came from the settlement's security coordinator, a human woman named Vera Santos. "Professor, we have a military vessel incoming. They've identified themselves as a cruiser from the Kajaxian Coalition. Their commander is requesting immediate access to the settlement and demanding a full resident roster. They claim they're pursuing fugitives." The blood drained from Kavian's face. The Kajaxian Coalition was a militaristic faction that had been expanding its territory across the frontier, absorbing smaller colonies and imposing martial law. They were ruthless and answered to no one but their council of warlords. Nova Haven had managed to remain neutral by virtue of its isolation and lack of strategic resources, but that neutrality was fragile. "Tell them to stand by," Kavian said. "I'm heading to the settlement center." "Kavian," Meridian called out as he moved toward the door. "Wait." He turned back to find her standing in the doorway, already dressed in practical clothing, her silver hair pulled back tightly. "I'm coming with you. It might be dangerous," Kavian said. "Then you shouldn't go alone," Meridian replied with the kind of stubborn determination he'd come to love about her. "Besides, they need to know that Vidalians live here peacefully. They need to see that we're not hiding anything." The settlement center was chaos when they arrived. Residents from multiple species were gathered, some frightened, others angry. Vera Santos stood near the main view screen, which displayed a massive military vessel descending through the atmosphere. It was sleek and predatory, bristling with weapons, a ship designed purely for intimidation and combat. "The commander's name is Vasilis Rock," Vera explained as Kavian joined her. "Military-grade weapons, enhanced tactical systems. His record shows at least 17 hostile takeovers of neutral settlements. He doesn't negotiate. He takes." The shuttle descended with mechanical precision, landing in the designated platform area. When the ramp lowered, Commander Vasilis Rock emerged, a towering figure nearly 7 feet tall, with the distinctive blue-gray skin of the Kajaxians. His uniform was black with red trim, decorated with insignias indicating his rank and combat history. He was flanked by a unit of soldiers, all heavily armed and moving with military precision. "I am Commander Vasilis Rock," he announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from absolute certainty of one's power. "I'm here investigating the whereabouts of Vidalian fugitives who have committed crimes against the Kajaxian Coalition. My sources indicate they may be harbored here." Vera stepped forward, her voice steady. "Commander Rock, Nova Haven is a neutral settlement. We don't harbor fugitives of any species. If you have specific information, we can work with you to investigate." Rock's cold eyes scanned the gathered residents, pausing when they landed on Meridian. His expression shifted, becoming predatory. "There is a Vidalian," he said, pointing directly at her. "You. Step forward." Kavian felt Meridian tense beside him, and he moved protectively closer to her. "She's a resident of this settlement," he said. "Her name is Meridian Vex, and she's done nothing wrong." Rock turned his full attention to Kavian, and the weight of that gaze felt like physical pressure. "And you are?" "Kavian Thresh, archaeologist and resident researcher for the settlement." "Interesting," Rock said, his lips curling into something that might have been a smile if it didn't contain so much menace. "The Vidalian is living with you, then? Tell me, Thresh, do you know who her father is?" Meridian stepped forward before Kavian could respond. "My father is Darius Vex, a merchant. He has no involvement with any coalition crimes. Darius Vex, Rock repeated, as if tasting the name. Yes, I know of him. He owes the coalition considerable debts from his failed merchant ventures. He's been marked as a person of interest, as have any family members associated with him. A chill ran down Kavian's spine. He understood now what this was really about. It wasn't about fugitives, it was about leverage. Rock intended to take Meridian, to use her as leverage against her father, or against the settlement itself. And the more they protested, the more justified Rock could claim to be. Meridian Vex is my legal spouse, Kavian said clearly, speaking a truth that had become his entire world. She is under the protection of this settlement and under human law, which grants her residency status and all associated rights. Rock's expression darkened. Human law means nothing in Kajaxian territory, Thresh, and Nova Haven is about to become Kajaxian territory. Before anyone could respond, Meridian made a strange harmonic tone that came from deep in her chest. It was purely Vidalian, a sound that humans couldn't even fully perceive, but that rippled through the settlement like a sonic wave. The lights flickered, and several of Rock's soldiers stumbled backward, disoriented. You will not take what is mine, Meridian said. Her voice layered with harmonics that transformed her musical tone into something powerful and commanding. I am bonded to this man and to this settlement. We are protected by the resonance itself. Rock stared at her in shock and fury. You're a singer, he said, understanding what she was. I've heard of your kind. Supposedly you manipulate quantum fields through harmonic frequencies. Dangerous. All the more reason to ensure you're under coalition control. He gestured to his soldiers. Take her. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion and chaos. Kavian moved without thinking, positioning himself between Meridian and the advancing soldiers. Silas, who had arrived during the commotion, threw a communication jammer into the center of the room, disrupting Rock's communication with his ship. Several settlement residents, both human and alien, moved to block the soldiers' path. Vera, ever the pragmatist, had already begun an evacuation protocol, moving non-combatant residents toward the secure section of the settlement. Run, Kavian urged Meridian, grabbing her hand. Get to the archives. There's a tunnel beneath the building. Go. Not without you, Meridian said stubbornly. Meridian, please. But there was no time for argument. Rock himself advanced, and Kavian found himself facing the commander in a confrontation he was completely unprepared for. Rock was a trained soldier, twice Kavian's size and vastly more experienced in combat. But what Rock hadn't counted on was Meridian's determination. She moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible. Her Vidalian physiology giving her an advantage of flexibility and speed that no human could match. When Rock tried to grab her, she used his own momentum against him, moving beneath his reaching arms and striking pressure points on his body that sent him to his knees. Gasping for breath. He's a singer, too. One of the soldiers breathed in awe and horror. That's impossible. Vidalian singers are supposed to be peaceful. We are peaceful, Meridian said, her voice still layered with those strange harmonics. But we are not defenseless when those we love are threatened. In the chaos that followed, the settlement residents managed to drive back Rock soldiers, using the terrain and the complex layout of the buildings to their advantage. Rock, recovering from Meridian's strike, realized he was facing more resistance than his small unit could handle. More importantly, his ship was no longer responding to his communications. Vera had disabled their external channels. This is not over, Rock snarled at Kavian and Meridian. The coalition will return with a full fleet. You cannot stand against us. Perhaps not, Kavian said, with a calm he didn't feel. But you're wrong about one thing, Commander. This settlement is not as defenseless as you thought. And if the coalition wants to take us, they'll have to do it knowing that we'll fight harder than you can possibly imagine. Rock stared at him for a long moment, then gestured to his remaining soldiers. Fall back. We're returning to the ship. As the soldiers retreated, Meridian sagged against Cavian, exhausted from the effort of maintaining her harmonic manipulation. Around them, the settlement was in disarray, damaged equipment, frightened residents, the aftermath of violence in what was supposed to be a place of peace. But as they stood together, watching the Kajaxian shuttle lift off from the landing platform, Cavian realized that something had fundamentally changed. Nova Haven was no longer a hidden neutral settlement. They had made enemies of the Kajaxian coalition, and that meant difficult times ahead. That night, after the settlement had been secured and immediate repairs had begun, Cavian and Meridian finally found a moment of privacy in their home. Meridian was in the kitchen, attempting to prepare something from their stores, but she moved with less grace than usual, clearly drained by the events of the day. "You shouldn't have risked yourself like that," Cavian said gently, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You were risking yourself," Meridian replied. "Did you think I would allow my husband to face danger alone?" Cavian rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of cinnamon and something uniquely alien that he'd come to crave. "I was terrified," he admitted, "watching you face Rock, knowing that if he'd managed to take you—" "I know," Meridian said softly. She turned in his arms to face him, and he saw that her lavender eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. "Cavian, I need to tell you something." His heart began to race. In all their months together, he'd learned to read her moods, and he could tell this was something significant. "What is it?" Meridian took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. "Before the alarm, before the chaos, I was going to wait for a perfect moment to tell you this. But perfect moments seem to be rare in our lives. So I'm telling you now." She met his eyes directly. "I'm pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Cavian stared at her, processing the words. "We're—" "Yes," Meridian said, a tentative smile playing at her lips. "Among my people, it's rare for Vidalian and human genetics to be compatible enough for conception. But our resonance, our bond, it was strong enough. We created something entirely new, Cavian. We created a life together." Cavian felt something shift in his chest, emotion so profound and overwhelming that he couldn't quite name it. Joy, fear, wonder, love, all of it at once. He pulled Meridian close, careful to be gentle, as if she might somehow break. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks," Meridian admitted. "I wasn't certain at first. Vidalian pregnancies are quite different from human ones. But I've confirmed it now. Our child is developing perfectly. In about 7 months, we'll have a daughter or son who belongs to both of our worlds." Cavian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, everywhere he could reach. "This changes everything," he whispered. "They'll want to use our child against us. Rock will tell the coalition, and they'll see a hybrid offspring as either a weapon or an abomination." "I know," Meridian said, and he heard the fear beneath her steady voice. "But they will also see hope, Cavian. They'll see proof that two species, from two completely different worlds, can not only coexist, but can create something beautiful together. Perhaps that's our real purpose here on Nova Haven. Perhaps we're meant to be the first of something new. A bridge between worlds." Cavian held her close, and as he did, he understood that their simple arrangement had transformed into something far more significant than either of them could have imagined. They had gone from an arranged marriage born of debt and necessity to a true partnership, to lovers, and now to the parents of something unprecedented. The road ahead would be dangerous. Rock and the Kajaxian coalition would return, and there would be others, those who feared change, who wanted to maintain the old separations between species. But Cavian also understood something else. Meridian had said it herself. They were hope. In a galaxy fractured by conflict and fear, they represented something revolutionary, the possibility of genuine unity across the boundaries that had divided civilizations for millennia. Their child would be living proof that love could transcend species, that connection could overcome difference. As they stood together in their kitchen, with the twin moons rising over the distant mountains and the settlement slowly recovering from the day's trauma, Kavian made a silent vow. He would protect his wife and his unborn child with everything he had. He would build something at Nova Haven that would endure beyond the immediate threat of the Kajaxian coalition. And he would ensure that his daughter or son grew up in a world that celebrated what they were rather than fearing it. Whatever comes, Kavian said softly to Meridian, we'll face it together. Meridian rested her head on his chest and placed his hand on her abdomen once more, where their child was growing, developing, preparing to enter a universe that would be forever changed by their arrival. Together, she echoed, and in that single word was all the commitment and love they'd built since that first day when two strangers had become partners, lovers, and now creators of a new beginning. The night deepened around them, and somewhere in the distance, the alien birds sang their strange, beautiful songs that sounded, to those who listened carefully, like a prophecy of a future where all beings could find harmony.